Hello, I'm Robyn Smith, and welcome to the Healthy Relationship Sisterhood Facebook group for women, and to this talk on your nervous system and trauma and how they're connected. So what I'd like to do is to look at your nervous system, and we'll talk about the different branches, and we'll just take a brief tour into the nervous system, and then we'll look at how your nervous system is affected by different kinds of trauma. And then we'll talk about how to work with that. So how to heal your trauma and modalities that will be helpful and that will not be helpful in working with trauma and your nervous system together. So here we go. Pull up a chair and get comfortable as we dive into the nervous system. And I am pulling up my notes so I can stay on track. So when there is trauma, whether it's a shock trauma, which is like a one-time event, like a sudden impact or a fall or a death in someone close to you, a hospitalization, a surgery, the nervous system is affected. And when there's the other kind of trauma, which you can call complex trauma or sometimes known as developmental trauma that happens over a longer period of time. If it's developmental, it happens early in your life, from in the womb to the first 5 years or so or beyond. And complex trauma can happen like from being in, an extended, like prisoner of war, in a war zone. So even as an adult. So trauma affects your nervous system, and your nervous system affects your body and your mind. They're interconnected. So your nervous system, we're going to look at the autonomic branch of the nervous system, which itself is divided into branches. So the autonomic it governs the automatic functions in your body. So the beating of your heart, the function of digestion and elimination, stuff that happens without you trying. Well, of course, elimination you have some control over, and you can control stuff like your heart, but generally, your body temperature, your sweat, these things are happening on their own without you having to think about, now I'm going to, add some, enzymes from my pancreas into my stomach, and now I'm going to churn that food. Like, we don't have to think about that. So that's happening automatically, thank goodness. So it can free up our brain for lots of other things we want to think about. So your autonomic nervous system is made up of different branches. Originally, there was the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and now we know through the work of Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory that the parasympathetic actually has its own two branches. So we have the sympathetic and the two branches of the parasympathetic. The sympathetic branch of your nervous system governs functions like, here's what it does to you. It picks up your heart rate, it brings up your heat, and it gives you energy. So when you, I'm a little bit using my sympathetic right now because I'm on camera, I'm being, functioning with my brain, I'm thinking, trying to be clear and organized. So I'm working with that branch of my nervous system probably more. We're not always only in one or the other. There's always a blend, but we're going to have a dominance in one side for most things. So when you're exercising, you're getting your heart rate up, like you've got energy, right? If you're running out the door, you're in a hurry, you're going to feel that bigger energy in your body. So the sympathetic branch is related to and sort of caused in some part by the hormones adrenaline and cortisol. When they're released into the system, you're going to be more in your sympathetic branch of your nervous system. And so those two hormones are also related to your function of fight and flight. When you're scared, when you're in danger, you have that automatic response to either fight or flight. And those are governed by that sympathetic branch of your nervous system. So we fight or flight to self-protect. So that's that sympathetic branch, and just obviously keeping it brief right now. And then we have our parasympathetic branch. And generally, if you know that term rest and digest, that's related to this parasympathetic, which is the branch that's helping you when it slows you down. Basically, it's slowing you down and it can calm you down. So we want to be in our parasympathetic branch of our nervous system more when we're digesting and when we're resting, because you don't want, adrenaline and cortisol, you don't want those hormones going through your system if you're trying to do something like relax, because those hormones are very uplifting and energizing. So for the parasympathetic branch to be on, you have to have less of those emergency hormones and high functioning hormones, and more of the more relaxing hormones like dopamine and oxytocin. So the parasympathetic branch has these two branches that Stephen Porges discovered, called the ventral vagal and the dorsal vagal. I'm not going to go into all the details of all the organs that they each regulate, but he's relating them to the vagus nerve, which is the longest cranial nerve. And it goes, there's a ventral branch and a dorsal branch. So that's where we have these two branches. And so the parasympathetic can either be related to ventral vagal, which is when you're in ventral vagal, it's when you're most relaxed and you're also engaged socially. So it's another way to talk about this branch is social engagement, which is a term from Stephen Porges, who created this understanding and did a lot of research on this. So social engagement is when you're having one of those enjoyable conversations, you feel easy, you feel open, you feel connected, you're able to hear, you're able to see, you're able to process information. So you're alert and you're relatively at ease. So that's a good sign that you're in that ventral vagal branch of your nervous system. Now, when you're in the dorsal vagal, that can be, it could be positive, like for sleep, because you're totally, unconscious, and that's a good thing when we want to be unconscious. But it's not so great when you want to be functioning and you're not, you're not able to. So there's a state that's called freeze. It's one of those, the 4 F's: fight, flight, freeze, and some people call it faint. That freeze is like is sort of like on your way to the shutdown. Sort of, some say it's between sympathetic and the dorsal branch of the parasympathetic, where you're kind of shutting down. Shutting down is like you're disconnected, you're dissociating, you're not totally here, not able to be present. And it may be pretty severe, like catatonia. That's a big dorsal shutdown, or you're in your dorsal vagal branch of your parasympathetic. When you are, of course, like a passed out, but also when you're collapsed energetically, you're depressed, you're sunken, you feel deflated, low energy, those can also be a sign that you're more in that dorsal vagal branch of your parasympathetic side of your nervous system. So if you're here with me live, feel free to comment, let me know if you have any questions, and I'll come back around to that. And say hello and let me know where you're listening from. So we have this basic understanding of the nervous system, and what, as I said before, we're never all 100% in one branch or another. Both should be online. If they're not, we're probably not alive. And ideally, we should be flowing between those states, because life is not flat, right? Life has ups and downs. Life has, oh my God, someone called and there's an emergency, I have to get out the door. Sympathetic branch. Oh my gosh, I'm in a hurry, I'm late for a meeting. Hurry, 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 right? Or, oh, how exciting, I just won a big prize, big energy, right? Or I'm on a bike ride and this is so fun, I'm going fast. Those are all sympathetic, and that's normal. And there's health to that. That's a positive thing. And then we have the end of the day, time to chill out, maybe watch a movie, sit down, eat a good meal, interact with people that you love. So ventral vagal branch, right? So we want to be able to flow between them. And the problem is with trauma, when there is a trauma, either a shock trauma, which is one of those short-term, one-time events, or complex trauma, which can be longer term and or developmental when you're still growing, that affects your nervous system. And what can happen is you can get stuck in one of those states. And it's not going to be the ventral vagal, because that's the more like healthy, even keeled state. We tend to get either stuck, what we call stuck on, which is when you're in the sympathetic and you're agitated, you're anxious, there's a lot of nervous energy. Maybe you can't stop shaking. Maybe you have to move all the time. Maybe you can't sit still. Maybe you always have to be doing something and going. So those are signs. Maybe you drink a lot of coffee, high strung, a lot of fear, agitation. Maybe you're annoyed a lot, argumentative, easily agitated, triggered. Those would be, you're more stuck on that on position, or in the sympathetic branch, and it's hard to shift out of it. Taking that in, I get a little myself a little agitated just giving you these examples. So right now I'm bringing myself back to more balance, and we'll talk about how I'm doing that. And then there's stuck on off, and that's more when you can be stuck in one of those shut down or depleted or depressed or lethargic, collapsed states where it's like apathy. Why does it matter? It doesn't matter if I participate in life. What's the point? Kind of depressed, downward energy. Maybe there's a flat expression, and there's not an ability to get excited, to feel joy, to feel energy. So those are when you're more stuck on off. So this can happen with trauma when we don't have a capacity to regulate ourselves. And let me step back and say that when trauma, there's some new definitions of trauma, some of which I've shared here in the past, is what happens inside of us based on what happens to us. So the trauma is not defined by what happened. It's not like because you were in that accident, you have trauma. It's more how you process the accident, how your nervous system manages with it. So when you have what we call dysregulation, your nervous system is upset, out of balance by what happened. That's one way to define trauma, to see that there's been a trauma. Of course, there's certain events that we could say, yeah, that would traumatize anybody, right? Someone holding a gun in your face or hitting you, or being in a really intense accident. But again, it's dependent on how you respond to it. So let's talk about that. How do we respond? We can respond, based on our history. So if you have a pretty balanced nervous system before an event, then you're more likely to kind of get back to your baseline of being able to ebb and flow through life's events. But if you've already had a lot of agitation in your nervous system, a lot of upsetting things that happen to you, a lot of abuse or neglect or accidents, big stuff that you didn't know how to handle. And when you're little, you don't know how to regulate your nervous system very well. A lot of us aren't given the tools for how to do that. Then you're more likely to already be dysregulated or out of balance. And so if something happens to you and you're already dysregulated, it's easier for you to get more stuck in one of those on or off positions like I was talking about. So put a yes in the comments if that is making sense, or if, say me too, if that is familiar to you for your own situation. It's interesting. I'm just going to tell a quick story in that I was talking, my brother was visiting, and he's just 2.5 years older. And we have, very different life experiences. We're very different in how we are in the world. And he was wondering, because I have some old digestive issues, and I did a lot of international travel and picked up some bugs, and that's still with me. And he he's more kind of an even keel guy. And I, in the past especially, had a lot more anxiety and difficulties with health and dysregulation, you could say. And so he was like, I don't get it. You know, we grew up with the same parents in the same household. How could we be so different? And I was pointing out to him, well, if you look at the beginning of our lives, you're going to see a lot of differences. And that's where all that impact was made. So for me, I had a good gestation and a good birth on time and no big drama in that. But early in my life, as some of you know, before I was 6 months old, my mother weaned me, which was too early to be weaned. But grateful I got to breastfeed, of course. I know some people didn't get that at all, and that's traumatic. So, but weaned early can be traumatizing, because it's like there's this important period of attachment that needs to happen in a baby with a mother, especially in the breast, and the nurturing that comes from that. And so the disconnect that happens, no, you can't have anymore, is very difficult for an infant who doesn't understand what's happening, right? It's different if you've been breastfeeding your child till they're like 3 or 4, which some people do, and then they have more cognition to understand that, you know, they have other sources of food, and there's maybe another baby who needs mommy more, and these types of things. But at that early age, the cognition isn't there to understand that why I can't have any more. And so there's just this cut off. So that happened. And then there were some other things, like then the parents went away for 2 weeks, and then I lost the full connection to my parents for 2 weeks, and I was left with my grandparents. Now my brother had the same thing. He was left with the grandparents too, but he was older. So he had a more, what we call secure attachment, which I've talked about here before. And our attachment style, whether it's secure or not, is going to affect our nervous system. So it's all intertwined. So because I didn't get that, as I got secure attachment for a little while, but then I got a disruption in the attachment. And that created some insecurity. Where's mommy? How come I'm not getting fed? In the same way, where's my attachment figure? So that creates, this disruption in the nervous system and the anxiety about that. So that's just a brief example of one thing that can happen that can disrupt the nervous system early in life. And there's so many things, right? There can be, like I said, you could have had a breech birth. You could have had a forceps birth. You could have, there could have been, your mother could have been ill, and not come home from the hospital, and you were home without her, or there's so many things that can happen. Or there could have been a divorce early in your life where your world falls apart. There can be fighting in the family, or one parent is gone a lot, and there's this grief and this longing and this confusion about where people are, this lack of strong bonding and attachment. So all of these things, let alone like, direct abuse, punishment, harshness, physical abuse or sexual or neglect, can all affect the child and how they are organized on the nervous system level. And so if you can imagine, when you get hurt by someone who's supposed to be protecting you, it's like very confusing and very scary. And so the nervous system, generally what we do at first, if we can, with certain things like neglect, is the child or infant will protest and they'll get very agitated. Where are you? I need my food. What's going on? Of course, they don't have words, so they're just crying and throwing a tantrum. And then if that happens long enough, it's exhausting, and it's also in a way safer for the infant to just shut down. So they'll turn themselves off. They'll turn off that reaction. They'll go into what's called that shutdown mode, which I was talking about before, because it's almost safer in a way to just deny, just not feel, than to have to feel all the pain of the neglect. So it's wired into our systems to do that. And other mammals as well. So we have this natural instinct that when we're in danger, first we'll try to flee. And if that doesn't work, we'll fight, right? Which is more, problematic potentially. And if that doesn't work, we'll faint or shut down. So that's just wired into our nervous system. And so we do that even though we might not be in that kind of imminent danger. will still go through these responses of fighting. Or, baby, of course, can't try to flee, but they'll flee internally, fight, and then shut down. So hopefully that's clear, and do let me know if you have any questions about that. So just to see like how our nervous system can be affected. So if there's, imagine, say your father comes home and maybe he's an alcoholic, and he's like complaining about things, and he's punishing children and hitting his wife or whatever's happening, and you're the child in that situation, what's going to happen? It's scary. You're going to have your adrenaline running. You're going to be in that sympathetic mode, and maybe you're going to hide, right, and try to disappear, so he doesn't hit you. Or maybe you were like a star student, but your sister wasn't, was disabled or wasn't able to achieve as well. And maybe you got a little reprimanding for that. Like, hey, don't outshine your sister, like let her shine a little bit. And so maybe then you started to keep yourself small because you didn't want to get in trouble. Maybe you were neglected and you didn't get enough attention. Maybe your older sibling did, and you're the younger one who felt like nobody's seeing me. Or maybe you're the middle child, right? Everyone else is getting attention and you're not. And so maybe you had to work harder to get attention, and you tried really hard to be that A student and to be the best gymnast or whatever it was. And so imagine all the energy that it takes to be like, look at me, I have to be big, I have to be present, I have to get seen. And so there's a lot of that sympathetic energy. So just getting some examples for what it might look like to have different kinds of trauma that then cause a response in the nervous system. And then you maybe have, I'm sure many of you have your own. So there's so many that I could share, but I'm going to keep moving. So let's talk about now, I'm just reading my notes real quick, make sure I didn't forget anything. Yeah. So it's something, just before we go on to approaches for healing, it's really great now that you have some understanding of the nervous system to start to pay attention to your own responses to life. How are you responding when someone turns their back on you, or when someone blames you for something? What's happening in your nervous system? And you're going to feel that maybe with a faster heart rate. Maybe your hands get sweaty, maybe you start feeling hot, or maybe you start feeling restless, maybe you get an anxiety. So you want to start to notice, what's my personal response to stuff happening that feels either scary or sad, or when I feel angry, how does my nervous system respond? And these things that, again, are automatic, we're going to feel because they get highlighted, like that knot in the stomach. Like you can't, necessarily create that. It just happens, that churning in the stomach, or sometimes there feels like a void inside. And there's other things like that I talked about that are more like the sympathetic responses of agitation and heat and clenching and tension. So as we start to turn towards how to heal and to work with our traumas, we want to consider the nervous system. The nervous system affects, like I said, your body and your mind. And so we want to find an approach that incorporates all of who we are, and not just the mind, or not just the body. So there are some approaches, and I'm not going to name specific, brands of work or anything. And as I've said, I think in an email that I sent out, if you got that, some approaches do work for some people and not for others. And so ultimately, you want to find what works for you. So that being said, some approaches are very mind oriented. So there's types of therapy or counseling that are very much focusing on what happened in the past, figuring that out, sorting out why you acted the way you did, or what happened and who said what and why, and then focusing on how you can make changes for the future, and often strategizing towards behavioral changes. And so while that can make some sense to want to understand, it's all very up here, right? Cognizing, understanding, figuring it out, what happened, and having the answers to that why question. And honestly, we don't always know why, and knowing why does not always even help. So I just want to add that in. But in the cognitive approaches, often there's a lack of attention to the body and the nervous system and the body's response. So if we leave that out, we're not addressing how trauma has made an impact on the body. So another very mental approach could be certain kinds of meditation, where certain meditations are very cognitive, where maybe you're repeating a mantra, maybe you are visualizing something, maybe there's a lot of self-observation. So there can be a lot of mental processing. And of course, meditation has so many benefits. But I do want to say that for some people, trying to sit quietly and meditate is actually re-traumatizing. It's actually very agitating for their nervous system. They cannot do it. So imagine you're like this all the time internally. Maybe it doesn't look like that from the outside, but you go to sit and it's just like it amplifies everything and it just feels horrible. And it's just super agitating. So if that's you, if meditation for you just stirs too much up, then I would recommend that you don't do that right now and you work more with your nervous system first, so that your meditation can actually serve its purpose and support you in creating more balance. Now, for some who are already, in a more balanced state energetically in a nervous system way, meditation is so wonderful and it helps them feel more relaxed and more present and more calm and centered. And for some, it's just like so painful to sit there. So I'd say give yourself a break if it's too much to sit. And for you, so more of a body-centered meditation is going to be helpful, or something that's more movement-oriented, like Tai Chi or Qigong or gentle yoga or slow walking or something, or dance. There's so many ways to get present with ourselves and connect with ourselves that don't have to be sitting still. So, and then there's some very body-oriented approaches like yoga. And of course, I am a yoga teacher. I think it has a lot of benefit. Other types of movement and breath work is very physical, very energetic. So pranayama, basic yogic breathing, or the more cathartic rebirthing kind of breath work. So those are more body-oriented approaches. And of course, they have their benefits. And I'm going to say again, for some people with trauma, those can also be agitating. Certain yoga poses are going to evoke certain emotions, and it can be very difficult. There can be memories that come back and can feel like flashbacks, and it can be re-traumatizing. And the same for breath work. For certain bodies, certain nervous systems, breath work is going to just be too much for you. So only you will know if you give it a try. And I don't know that anyone can tell you what's the best thing for you, but here's what I have to say is that I think the approach that combines both the body and the mind is the best bet for having the least kind of upset and disturbance in your nervous system, because you want to work with the body to bring more balance to the system, but you also want your mind, your intellect, to understand what's happening and to work through, the stories, the beliefs, the concepts that you have about yourself or about what's happening, because a lot of that is in the way of our healing. We have unconscious beliefs, we have misguided beliefs, we have identities, ways that we think about ourselves that just aren't true anymore, that we're still holding on to. And those may not shift just with regulating your body, like calming your nervous system. They may not. So that's where working with your mind, which we call top down, and working with your body, bottom up, together, there's integration. So hopefully I'm making sense. And again, feel free to chime in and let me know how that sounds to you, and if you have questions about that. So yeah, I just saw it in my notes, psychodrama. That's something from the 70s that my parents did. I grew up in West LA, and there were batakas, and they were these big, sort of like a baseball bat, but covered in foam and cloth, and they were red, and they had a handle. Rah, it was very cathartic, and they would be hitting things, screaming at each other, hitting the bed. And and there is some, emotional release, which can be helpful, but also it didn't really incorporate, it didn't integrate that release necessarily. So, and for some people, it was too agitating to the nervous system. So that's just one more example of, that's, and if you wonder why that's not so popular anymore, maybe I just spelled that out because there wasn't enough integration and lasting results. So it's, some people are really going for that big release, like, I released all that energy and I feel so much better, but that doesn't necessarily mean you get a lasting change, right? If you get a big emotional release, a big cry, of course that's healing, and it can be healing and beneficial. And there's still that like cognition piece and the body piece that could be integrated. So if you're working with someone, I think it's really important that you check about these things and see how they're working with, do they understand the connection between the nervous system and trauma? Do they understand the importance of, if they're working with the body a lot, do they understand the importance of integrating with the mind and understanding? And some modalities are very focused on just calming the body, right? Calm the body, calm the mind. And then there's not that integrative piece of actually like working with concepts that are unhealthy, no longer serving. So that is the gist of what I wanted to say. If you are watching later, feel free to leave a question, to leave a comment, and let me know your thoughts, your concerns, your questions, and I'm happy to come back and respond. Thank you so much for watching, and I have a special guest next week. So if you're watching live, September 2nd, we have a special guest. So make sure to tune in to this interview I'll be doing, and have a wonderful evening or day or whenever you're watching.